So, hi, and welcome back to Liberating Leadership. So, apologies for anyone who came in between and tried to get into the previous session that we unfortunately had to postpone because we couldn't hear Shireen. And we're now moving on to our final session, which is Navigating Cultural and Gendered Leadership with Czarina. So, hi. It's good to
Hi,
see you. I'm glad we
great to
can hear
see
you.
you. Yes, me as well.
So I thought we'd just start by you just sharing a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to be having this space talking about leadership in
Mhm,
the international development sector, the solidarity work internationally.
mhm,
That's where I got my start.
mhm,
Um, I'll do a little bit of background about my
mhm.
understanding of development because that
Yeah,
actually leads to my path and why I'm here
yeah,
today.
sure.
So, so first of all, I think it's important to not have illusions about the origins of development work and
Mhm,
how it's come to be. And I remember that as a college student, I was very lucky to be in a seminar that took a critical look at development. I studied. I was actually in a program. I graduated in a program that was development studies, called
mhm,
development studies, but it was actually quite a critical look, especially based on Arturo Escobar's look,
mhm,
critiquing the critiquing the foundations of the development model as
mhm,
being one that is based on um, the interests of the West,
mhm,
um, and and therefore exporting notions of progress and
mhm,
modernization that have been developed in the West
mhm.
to other countries for foreign policy interests.
Yeah.
At the same time, it is important to claim this space, and so that's really what started off on my path. So I
Yeah.
just remember as an undergraduate, just being really excited about the work. My mom is from the Philippines, and
Mhm,
so my goal at that point was to return to the Philippines and just really understand. U.S. intervention in the Philippines and what that meant for me and
mhm,
my identity and my roots and where just basically the history of my own family.
mhm,
Um, but in the process of deciding to do that, I also was very interested in parallel history with Guatemala, got
mhm,
very interested also U.S. intervention in Guatemala. And so I first went to Guatemala with a project a more community-based project,
mhm,
precisely because it had these critiques of the normal development
mhm,
power dynamics, and so the work was to be a human rights accompanier with my returned refugee communities,
mhm,
and that was an agreement that had been requested, and this is with NISQA, Network in Solidarity with the People of Guatemala.
mhm,
This was an agreement that was requested by the community as
mhm,
part of the terms of the peace accords, and what I appreciated about that is that it was a model where there were like when I first went to the community, we were sitting down with community leaders where there
mhm,
was constant consultation. Even in going to the community, what was beautiful about it is that every night I would go and have dinner with another family. So it was just this very kind of horizontal way of understanding the community, understanding
mhm,
its needs,
mhm.
and so basically, I just want to say that has shaped me ever
Right. Yeah.
since. The sense of leadership, the sense of shared ownership about what we're doing in
Mhm.
development and who are we asking about, whose needs are we meeting,
Yeah.
and putting kind of community and people's needs first and foremost. So
Mhm,
very briefly after that, I'll just say I was
mhm,
inspired by that, became a community organizer. That led me back to Guatemala. I ended up going to graduate school. I'm an anthropologist, and I work as a coach with uh, senior managers in international development agencies. But the
mhm.
foundation of it comes from that initial experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And so we're going to talk about leadership in your
Hmm.
work and the approaches to leadership you're finding effective with the people that
Hmm.
you work with. So
Hmm.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on what approaches to leadership you are finding effective, what you're noticing, what you're seeing.
Great, thanks. So, one of the things that that people have brought to me recently, and that also I have noticed in the different workspaces, is if we're looking simply at the workspace itself,
Mm-hmm.
um, within an organization, within an agency, not even speaking about the work that the agency is doing outside,
Mm-hmm.
right, in the community or in the country, um, that there is a concern even within the agencies that there's a kind of a notion of leadership that's being exported or imported, depending on your perspective.
Right.
And people have told me that, I mean, it is in many ways this Western style of leadership, an aggressive, male kind of centered kind of leadership, that it has a lot to do with, power plays and, kind of taking control of your team and setting the direction.
Mm-hmm.
And it is also, people have also raised concerns. I've been working with country leadership who are from the countries
Mm-hmm.
that the agencies are working in, and they're
Yeah.
working under supervisors who are not from those countries.
Yeah.
And so there are tensions that
Yeah.
arise, and that's not to say that's not insurmountable. Um, and so some of what I notice is has come down to cultural and gendered expectations of leadership.
Yeah.
So people have expressed to me that there's a desire for more from themselves as well, to not necessarily have to be in the spotlight as a leader, to
Right.
want to develop other people's leadership on their team, to
Mm-hmm.
not want to have to be aggressive, and actually to also just sometimes simply just wanting to have like a more joyous workspace,
Right.
not having, I mean, culturally, I think, and I mean, I know this coming from the US, there's a lot of stress on time and, how much we're getting done and a certain kind
Mm-hmm.
of performance that many of the people I work with that's not in tune with what they want. They
Yeah.
want more space in their lives and they want more time to be with
Mm-hmm.
families, and that's also should be, I think, part of the work. So basically, the tension is that I have also believed that social justice really begins in our everyday relationships, and so
Mm-hmm.
that also means the workplace. It definitely means the workplace, and if we can't do it with the people that we're working closest to, then it ends up reverberating in how we're going out to the wider community, to the wider
Mm-hmm.
world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so when you're working with people on some of these issues, can you say a bit about how you help them navigate them? Because I think, yeah, they're challenges that maybe a lot of us might have seen showing up. But how can you say a bit more about how you help people navigate them
Mm-hmm.
and find their way, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yes. First of all, I myself come from a background where I see the possibilities of more horizontal and collective
Yeah.
leadership. I'm sorry, is there an echo that's coming in?
No,
No?
you're
Great.
good.
That's just on
Yeah,
my
you're good.
phone. Okay, my
Yeah,
end.
it's you.
So first of all, so if there's room in their workspace for that, and if that's an interest of theirs, then
Hmm.
um, then then that's something that we can explore. Like, how
Hmm.
can we look at the culture of the organization and what they can do as leaders
Hmm.
to create this? And sometimes, even if the organization is structured more hierarchically, there is space for even simple things,
Hmm.
like um, like making a time to really value relationships within teams,
Hmm.
and small things like showing as and when I say leader, I also want to say anyone can be a leader. So actually, I'll step back us for a second and say I see a
Yeah,
difference
sure.
between leadership and management. And so
Yeah.
anyone can be a leader. Anyone
Mhm.
can be a leader and have this role. And so whoever you're working with, to really make time for those relationships and to be
Mhm.
able to have a time for a special one-to-one kind of conversation with each of your team members, please, people you're closest to working with. And
Mhm.
as simple as it seems, that can actually break down a lot of barriers and
Mhm.
open up a greater space for understanding, a
Mhm.
conversation about not only kind of logically knowing my needs, your needs, but
Mhm.
also developing that empathy that
Mhm.
is so crucial in building constructive relationships moving forward. So
Right.
so that's the first thing I want to say. And I want to make sure I'm not talking too much. So I want to just check in to see if
No, carry
if you
on.
have any questions
Continue.
about that or
Right, yeah. Yeah, and for people that haven't been on the other sessions, you can just type questions. I don't think I said at the beginning of this one, but you can just type questions here in the and say hello. I'll just type hello so you see what I mean in the chat box at the side. If you have questions or want to say hi to us, then please do go ahead. But also carry on. Please continue.
okay, sure. So that's one thing that I offer to people.
Mhm.
And well, actually, let me ask you. I mean, is that something that you found is common in your work as well, or that there might be
Mhm.
challenges to that, or
Yeah.
even from the other speakers? Because I do want to make sure I'm engaging in a
Yeah.
dialogue as opposed to
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
speaking
Yeah. Yeah.
myself.
No, we've talked quite a bit about two things, I guess, like the fluidity of the idea of
Mhm,
leadership and leading, and
mhm,
then also and how we can do it from wherever we are in
mhm,
organizations, and then I
mhm,
think also navigating expectations of what a leader is. So
mhm,
Roshni from
mhm,
Yuva talked a lot about her changing perception of what leadership looks like for her and her organization, for example, earlier. So
mhm,
um, definitely it's speaking to that
mhm,
similar thing, and I think it's
mhm,
interesting to hear how you're in that sort of role of maybe more coaching and supporting
mhm, mhm,
people,
mhm,
how you're able from that perspective to help
mhm,
people navigate it, because I think it's something that's probably coming up for people a lot. And I think
mhm,
in the first session I spoke a bit as well about these different ways that I think about leadership as a more potentially more shared and collective kind of thing,
mhm,
and also about from
mhm.
like my perspective on if we lead centering care and relationships, how that
Mhm.
looks very different. So you're
Yeah.
speaking to where we've been journeying a bit today as
That's
well.
yeah, and that's great, and thanks for bringing that in right now
Yeah.
because it's it's helpful to just have the
Yeah.
conversation dynamic. Yes, I think that's actually that actually brought to mind another tool that has both actually come from partly folks that I've worked with have been interested in this and brought it to me, and it's also
Yeah.
something I know from my experience is very helpful. Is having circles of support.
Yeah.
And this might and to create this even if it's not their institute and not to expect that it's there institutionally, right?
Right.
So, um, because when we're talking about navigating cultural and gendered expectations of leadership, we're talking about creating new models often
Hmm.
because we're talking about like well, which culture, I mean, there's millions around the world. So, if you're coming from one particular location, then there might not be already a model for this.
Right.
You're creating it. So in order to do that, what I would recommend, and I offer and suggest, and find ways how this works in people's lives, but creating a circle of could be friends and colleagues, people you trust at your own workspace or
Right.
completely outside of it.
Hmm.
It could be people who are involved in the development solidarity sector or not, people who are models to you of what it means to be a leader, meaning,
Hmm.
someone who's kind of taking a stand for your values and for your vision.
Hmm.
And And so something, I've even done in my personal life, had friends do is, create like a time to get together, or simply a call,
Mhm.
like a handful, 4, 5, 6 friends, and just have that means of support. And that's a
Mhm.
crucial way of creating the validity, because often workspaces or places that try to mold us into something other than who we are can take a toll on us, and
Mhm.
change our sense of even what we should be doing, or put pressure on us to
Right.
act towards others that ways that we shouldn't. I mean, I remember times when I've been asked to do things that I didn't feel were right, and eventually I had to leave those spaces, so
Yep.
um so to create that external, I mean, basically not to bring you back to yourself,
Yep.
have weekly check-ins with people, groups of people who can reaffirm your values, your sense of self, and that can just give you more energy to even go
Mhm.
into workplaces that are very, very challenging, and
Mhm.
retain that energy of you to continue to look for how to have those caring and sustaining relationships, in detrimental workspaces.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting what you're saying about detrimental workspaces. Um, it's interesting that you use that phrase, because I think what we talked about a lot today is what alternatives to that might look like. But the
Mhm,
reality is that lots of people in our sector and
mhm,
related sectors are dealing with work environments that are really challenging, right?
mhm,
So I guess I'm interested in that, and you were saying, you have been in situations where you've had to get out, and many of us have been, I'm
mhm.
sure. So how do you make that decision?
Oh, to
When is
get
the
out.
time to get out? Yeah, no, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm. Yes.
Or how did you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So of course of course it would be varied for any person. And one thing, so on the one hand, I believe in trusting your gut or following your heart. At the same time, I also know economic realities, and also
Right.
want people to be fully aware. I know economies are very challenging these days. So,
Yeah,
some people might advise, well, if your heart's calling to get out, then just get out right away. And I know that's not a reality for people.
yeah,
So,
no,
so first of all, just being very clear on your financial situation, who you might be supporting in your life,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
just if you're getting the sense that this is not right for you, then begin to make a plan.
Mhm.
Trust that voice. Don't put it aside. Um,
Mhm.
so it's different to make a plan to leave versus saying, well, I can't get out, let me just stay here. And then just kind of you're getting drained day after day. You become part of the machine, you become part of the wheel.
Mhm.
Um, so, what I'm suggesting is get clear, get
Mhm.
clear on what it is that if this environment is serving your needs or not.
Mhm.
If it's not serving your needs and your vision is that eventually you've got to leave this, you
Mhm.
might not be able to take that step right away, but
Right.
start making a plan. And once you
Mhm.
have that plan, you will start to feel like at least there's forward movement and you're not part
Mhm.
of this machine that's draining you.
Yeah.
And maybe, it might take a year. It might take, however long, this 3 months, 6 months to build up whatever kind of savings you need to feel like you can have a security net, a
Mhm.
safety net to make that transition. And then just find ways to make consistent action towards that. Again, support is helpful. Check in with your group of friends or summon it with your family. Make sure you can get some kind of accountability to partner or something,
Mhm.
um, who can kind of you can check in with and make sure. Okay, I said 3 months ago I wanted to make a transition. Am I really moving forward towards this or not?
Yeah.
Um, yes, yeah.
Mhm. I was thinking about this idea of organizations feeling like this treadmill, or I can't remember the exact
Hmm.
word you use, but just
Yeah.
when people feel in that way. And I wondered if, like, from your perspective of both as an anthropologist and also from the work you've done. Why is it that so many aid and development organizations feel like that to people? And like, so I'm just thinking of the broader picture, like, why might they feel like that? And what might we do about it is the follow-up, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and it's interesting. I was in a class yesterday where we're looking at a reading that's talking about basically the, in this case, the colonial structure of Guatemala and the author's perspective from a Marxist, pretty orthodox Marxist perspective, that it's the society itself, the colonial setup of society that makes it that such that people within it don't have that much individual choice and are kind of forced to be in this model of like enormous exploitation that even ends up turning against their own personal relationships, even Indigenous relationships within communities. So that's certainly one perspective and aspect of this is, we can apply it to organizations. There are organizations that are, the broader picture is there is an economic aspect to it. Organizations have to be meeting certain goals, objectives in terms of delivery of services or whatever they're doing, have to meet funding requirements. The funders have their own goals, and then in an environment where philanthropy and donations are being cut, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on jobs, and so I think in that sense. That's when people need to be pressured into fulfilling these expectations only to meet the very basic kind of economic goals of the organization. At the same time, I also see definitely from many perspectives. I mean, whether it's a coaching perspective or a perspective of social change, that there is room within that system to make a change and to get out of kind of the psyche that you're sort of forced into. So that's why I say it's important to have these other both create spaces where you can within the organizations and outside to be able to reconnect with your dreams, because people, I mean, what I mean with dreams, I actually really meant to say to connect with your vision of your society and social justice. So because that's why many of us have entered this work to begin with. And I also have seen, so drawing on the anthropology side or whatever, interacting with organizations, there is, I also have a background in theater. I also strongly believe that as an alternative, not an alternative, but another perspective on this one of the pressure in the organizations is the power to envision, the power of what we're moving towards, the power of embodying artistically and creatively, and even just in our own heads, these other alternate realities that we want to move to. And that itself, even though like the strict material conditions might be taking a toll, be very oppressive, there's also this other space that we can kind of tune into more and more each day. In the break times and the times there we're just sitting on the bus and just like kind of daydreaming about like, this is how my workday is, but this is really how I want it to be. And that becomes a basis of creating room in ourselves to change our own behavior. And then that can actually ripple out to others.
It's interesting because Esra, who spoke before you, was talking about the need for us to kind of imagine a very different future in our sector and potentially more widely as well. And I think there's something in that that's been a bit of a thread through today about imagining what could be different, both on the level of practice day to day, like you're drawing attention to, and then also on that vision of the world we want to see as well.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's a very powerful thing. And I know um, there's a lot of great community-based organizations that do this visioning and,
Yeah.
in very tangible ways, right? Where you take out a big piece of paper and you
Yeah.
get out markers and everyone draws,
Yeah.
part of their vision. And then sometimes if you get to the larger organizations, that piece can get lost
Yeah.
sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important to really connect back into it. I mean, it's fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk a bit about collective or shared approaches to leadership. Unfortunately, we were
Mhm.
going to
Mhm.
talk more about that with Czarina, and we unfortunately
Mhm.
couldn't get her mic on earlier. But yeah, like, what do you think about collective and shared approaches to leadership in the sector? What have you seen? Are there things that you think
Mhm.
are interesting from that perspective?
Yes. So I have not seen a lot of that in larger
No.
organizations, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So the experiences that I draw on are smaller
Yeah.
organizations or grassroots organizations. I
Yeah.
shouldn't say smaller because really, honestly, like the number of people that they're connected to outside the formal organization might be fairly large,
Huge.
right?
Right. Absolutely.
Um, but organizations where there is room for um, deviating from a traditional top-down structure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of bringing that into a larger organization, again, it how the most room I see for that is in the culture that's created for one's own team. And sort
Mm-hmm.
of even though the formal relationships are still structured in a particular way,
Yeah.
um, on a level of relationships and personality, almost creating a culture where there's more room and there's more space
Mm-hmm.
um, for for example, having more room for constructive feedback and
Mm-hmm.
discussion. If one is the leader, the supervisor,
Mm-hmm.
creating room where people on your team, people who quote unquote report to you, your supervisees can speak to you and can also offer you feedback, and
Mm-hmm.
that you as a leader can receive it and can also, see where to shift your behavior to meet
Mm-hmm.
those needs and to make a more open workspace. And people have found that to be very helpful, have found that having a more positive culture in their teams changes the dynamic and changes um, the energy and motivation. I know that's
Mm-hmm.
not a complete solution. I know it's
Mm-hmm.
not, not changing the entire agency to become more horizontal, but it's a step towards that, and perhaps with time, if enough of those little nodes are being created with people
Mm-hmm.
thinking that way and there being a positive experience from that, maybe it could tip the manner of working within an organization.
Right. Right. I was interested in thinking back to your story of your first work and how it
Hmm.
informs your work, and whether like there might be learning from that around what
Hmm.
organizations we could look like, that kind of imagining piece, like
Hmm. Hmm.
what would it look like if we had
Hmm.
organizations that were kind of much
Hmm.
more horizontal or collective, or something like
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
whatever you envision, I guess.
Yes. Well, what's interesting is the first thing that came to mind for
Mm-hmm.
me was actually not the overall structure of the organization, but what I see as some of the challenge of um, the the leaders, the senior managers, the top people,
Right.
the sort of the barriers that would prevent them
Right.
from
Mm-hmm.
accepting this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is partly where some of the relationship and the kind of the psychology comes in,
Yeah.
because often I think because of all the pressure that we mentioned on organizations, a lot of the pressure falls on quote unquote top person to be
Mm-hmm.
having the deliverables,
Yeah.
um, and so there's a measure of self-protection that
Yeah.
happens and guardedness,
Mm-hmm.
and also sometimes very sensitive, a lot of sensitivity to critique from
Mm-hmm.
people you're supervising. Um, and in all of that, and all of like basically creating barriers to kind of boost up one's own authority and
Mm-hmm.
exert one's authority over others.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that um, some of those challenges, I would say, are some of the biggest obstacles to creating a more formal or informal kind of horizontal or collective
Mm-hmm.
space of leadership. If
Yeah.
I'm making sense, I didn't really speak about the first experience, but that's what
No,
came to
that's
mind
okay.
when you asked me the question. Is
Mm-hmm. The
I
challenges.
think one of the challenges is simply that even the people who are higher up on the organizational chart can feel themselves safe
Yeah.
to feel themselves safe to take a risk with another structure that
Mm-hmm.
actually in some ways leaves them a little bit more vulnerable, because they can't
But
fall back on just saying, well, I'm the boss, you know,
mm-hmm.
I'm the top person on this team, you know, in this department. um eh, it actually requires a more kind of grounded and internal sense of confidence,
Yeah.
um, in the ability to still move, like to still be able to motivate people to move forward towards a goal while letting go of the normal protections of authority. Am I
Mm-hmm.
making
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah, totally. And actually, it really chimes with a few of the other conversations we've had today of that personal piece that's needed to kind of get us into a place as individuals and also between ourselves where we
Mhm,
can kind of let go of some of that stuff, right?
mhm, exactly.
Because these dynamics are so kind of in and around all the organizations that we've been used to, maybe as well as in our experience of what leadership looks like, that it actually
Mhm,
takes them shedding, and some of that shedding is about shedding our own idea of what it means if I'm a leader, as well as shedding
exactly.
other people's ideas, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I wonder about whether there's experience that you've had working with people around doing any of that shedding, if there's any reflections you've got on that. And
Mhm.
maybe some people can't do it, and maybe there's, there are people that are going to find that easier than others, or whatever it is. But I wonder if you have
Mhm.
reflections.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think that sometimes um, when people are most open to this shift is when something else is happening often
Mm-hmm.
in their lives that kind of brings them to a space of being open to a change in general.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the opportunity to have a conversation eventually about um, other ways of working in their
Mm-hmm.
life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, that's actually where things like burnout and things like just losing energy and those moments when you're kind of almost brought to your knees, that's actually
Right.
where ironically there's an opportunity for tremendous change,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
some of the and personal reflection. The burnout may be coming from your supervisors, but then it often, when people start to experience how they can shift in relation to these to other questions of
Mm-hmm.
stress and pressure,
Mm-hmm.
then they also are more open to looking at how are they relating to people on teams that they're managing or in the
Yeah.
departments.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to kind of come in. It'd be hard to come in and just frontally talk to some of the supervisors about this.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a personal experience and reflection
Mm-hmm.
that um, that brings people to a realization that something else needs to change as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that I think we've also had that reflected through the day, this theme of kind of sometimes there are those moments where we realize we need to do things differently, and they might impact on us personally, or I guess they could be also culture, moments in an organization's
Yeah.
experience, but those feel like
Yeah.
opportunities, right?
Yeah, and it could come through other moments too. There's been times when people have been, again, just realizing they're not practicing the
Mm-hmm.
values, like why they started in this work to begin with. Or maybe there are larger shifts where
Mm-hmm.
there might be people within the organization and others that are bringing more attention to certain dynamics
Yeah.
that, there should be more um, local leadership. There should be more leadership from women, things like this that cause people to reflect.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So
so yeah.
there could be a range of stimulus, but there somehow needs to be some kind of moment for
hmm
reflection. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
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 So I've written there, not very eloquently, questions welcome. So if anyone's
Mhm.
listening live to this conversation and would like to ask questions, please do so now because we're coming towards the end. Um, I'd like to, as we wait and see if anyone's got a question who's
Mhm.
here live, and also knowing that people will be listening to this later as well. But if anyone's got
Mhm.
questions in real time, let us know. But just give you an opportunity to, if there's anything else you'd like to share or say before we close as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, Well, first of all, I'm so happy that this conversation is happening and that there's a lot of um, i- intersecting themes.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of what might be most useful to think. So I see that okay, so the question of how can we lead in a way that honors our values?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this is an opportunity to constantly check in. I mean, I really believe that when one is being more authoritative and really not being oppressive or just not being right with other people one's working with,
Mm-hmm.
I really believe it doesn't feel good to that person.
Mm-hmm.
And and that it's not sustainable, or when one is bullying um and that's somewhere down that's somewhere um within those moments of acting like this,
Mm-hmm.
there is a deeper sense that something's not right, that one isn't happy, that one is not really um ultimately moving towards fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
and so and I think all of us have had some kind of experience like that at some point in our
Mm-hmm.
lives. At
Right.
some point, whether it's a school moment where, we're trying to, I don't know, like get a class group to finish an assignment and,
Mm-hmm.
we act a certain way, or whether as parents, there's a moment where we're wanting our kids to fall in line in a certain way, to get
Mm-hmm.
out the door on time, or,
Mm-hmm.
those little moments of when we find ourselves trying to be more authoritative and control.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are opportunities. Well, first of all, for self reflection on that,
Mm-hmm.
for also self compassion, and also getting a lens into other people in our lives who are acting that way towards us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's a first thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
number two, I would say, once one kind of gets that internal calling out,
Mm-hmm.
that it's a moment for us to really check in with our internal compass,
Right.
our sense of values, our sense of ethics, why we're doing what we do. Is this how we want to relate to others? Is this how we want to relate to our kids? Is this how we want to relate to our classmates? Is this how we want to relate to others in our workspace?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an opportunity to begin to rethink how we are standing as leaders in our lives. I
Mm-hmm.
would say that when one is behaving more authoritatively, that's when I would put you in the category of manager. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, and then when you start to have this internal reflection and start to think about, well, I want to do things differently. There might
Mm-hmm.
not be a model in my organization. There might not be a model even in my community. I
Mm-hmm.
want to do things differently. I have another vision, and I want to be true to like this inner sense that something is off. That's when
Mm-hmm.
one begins to stand out as a leader, comes into
Right.
one own leadership wherever you stand in the organizational chart, you know.
Yeah. Right.
Um, and then from that moment, you can what you have once you have that decision to make a change,
Mm-hmm.
start deciding on some actions. Some actions might come clear to you.
Mm-hmm.
Start deciding on some actions, some little shift, just like a little shift that you can make,
Mm-hmm.
that'll make you feel better in your own heart and your own self.
Mm-hmm.
And that begins to start the movement to trusting yourself, your own inner sense of self, um, it, and leadership to live more congruently with your values.
Mm. Yeah, great. That's really helpful. Thanks for sharing
Good.
that.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being here with us. And this is the end of the day. So I'm just
Yeah.
going to say a couple of things. Thank you to everyone who's joined us at different points of the day for Liberating Leadership. I'm going to pull out some reflections from all our conversations and be sharing them in the collective. But thanks to those of you who've joined us live. It's been a really, really interesting, really inspiring, and I think I said it earlier, juicy day full of different reflections on these themes. So I hope people have got a lot out of it, and I look forward to sharing more in the collective. And thank you for being here with us at the end of the day,
Thank
Czarina.
you all. So
Really
this
good
is
to see you.
wonderful. It was so great to have this conversation and these kinds of questions and people that are bringing this up. I mean, it gives me a lot of hope for change
Mm,
and just ongoing spaces for doing the work that we really feel called to do and see the things that we want to see for better futures for all our people
mm,
in this world. Yeah,
yeah.
thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And
You're so
yeah,
welcome.
have a good evening, people who are in
Yes.
evening now, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you in the collective. Take care.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.